Ladies and gentlemen, can I bring you to order, please? Can I bring you to order? Janet and Becky, thank you. Okay, when were we live now? We're live, thank you. Okay, right, great. So I've been telling everybody come to order while we're live. That's great. Okay, anyway, it's a warm welcome to those attending and to our viewers watching live on the Council YouTube channel, Hillingdon, London. My name is Councillor Henry Higgins and I'm the chairman of this meeting. Details of business to be considered today are shown on the agenda, copies of which are accessible online or under the live broadcast. For those present in the room attending to speak, please note that you will be filmed and any statements you make will be recorded and made public. A reminder to anyone speaking today that your voice will only be audible online when your microphone is switched on. If there is a fire alarm, we do not expect a fire drill, so if the alarm goes off, please follow officers to the fire exits and out of the building at the designated meeting points. For you who have mobiles or tablet devices in the room, please switch them off or put them to silent before the meeting starts. Please note the councillors on the committee may use their laptops or tablets during the meeting to view agendas and paperwork. I'll go through the attendees. Before we move on to the agenda, I would like to introduce the councillors present. Councillor Tuckwell, present. Vice Chairman. Councillor Chapman. Thank you. Councillor Duncan. Present. Thank you. Councillor Hagger. Thank you. Councillor Morgan. Thank you very much. Councillor Morse, opposite lead. Councillor Morse, are you present? I can see you there. Just acknowledge me. Thank you. Councillor Sansapori and Councillor David Yarrow. I'd like to thank Councillor David Yarrow for stepping in at the last moment. Thank you very much for that. Our planning officers, Mandeep Malhotra. Present. Thank you. Head of Planning, James Rogers. Thank you. Transport Officer, Alan Tilley. Thank you. Our Legal Advisor, Glenn Egan. Thank you. And Democratic Officers, Anish Teji. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. First we'll have apologies for absence, please.
Apologies from Councillor Melvin with Councillor Yarrow substituting.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest before matters before us? Nope. Okay. To receive and agree the minutes of the last meeting. Yeah, agreed. Okay, to confirm public and private reports, all part 1 in public. Part 1 public for recording live stream. Item 6 relates to the extension of written representation in lieu of the physical speaking rights. This enables the lead petitioner, applicants, agents and ward councillors to attend and to speak or submit written representation. They should do, if they prefer to do so. Do we agree that this is an agenda? Yeah. Yeah. Good. So first of all, yeah. Is there matters notified in advance or urgent? No. The last thing, so we go on to agenda item 7 and 12. I'm going to take them both together. I've agreed in advance that there'll be 7 minutes for the... We're okay, yeah? For them to speak, so I'll hand over to 14 altogether, yeah, sorry. Okay, so you're going to give us a presentation, Nadia, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Agenda items number 7 and number 12 relate to 5 Otter House and 4 Waterside House, both at Cowley Business Park. Before we go into looking at the schemes themselves, both of these applications before us are prior approval applications which have been submitted under the General Permitted Development Order. 2015. I just wanted to clarify, we have been here before, our hands are tied is the way we like to phrase it, but I just wanted to remind everybody that there are only 5 things that we can consider under this prior approval. There have been numerous objections and there are concerns about this development, but I just wanted to highlight that there are 5 things we can consider, and they're up on the screen at the moment. So transport and highways, contamination, flooding, impacts on noise, and adequate natural light into the habitable rooms of the dwellings. Now, both of these items have an addendum which was circulated earlier today. One of the additional bits of information that has been received from the flooding officer is that the land, if I can point to it, which is covered by this tree preservation order in this area, is actually under the same ownership as Otter and Waterside House. When that information has come to light, what we've done is, because we know it's in the same ownership, we're able to impose planning conditions to try and restrict the use of the landscape buffer. So your condition is set out here. So we're proposing a condition to try and secure minimum use and access into the landscape buffer zone, which has concerned residents. One of the things I also wanted to point out here was that the land covered by A1 on this tree preservation order prevents any works taking place to the trees within that tree preservation order. So there are multiple layers in which we're looking to protect the use of the landscape buffer zone, which is predominantly the concern of local residents. So we have proposed the following condition, which is for both Otter House and Waterside House. If you do have any questions about the condition, please don't hesitate to raise it. The text highlighted in red on the condition on your screen is an update to the condition that was published for agenda item 12. So we ourselves had already proposed agenda item number 12 to have that condition. We do feel it would be more robust if we were able to include the land covered by the tree preservation order, primarily because there could be some uncertainty about what is within the ownership of the applicant or if it was sold. So we're trying to belt and braces cover what land we're referring to when we talk about the landscape buffer. The landscape buffer includes the area covered by A1 on the tree preservation order that we can see on the screen, but also includes a small island of land which is actually fully enclosed by Fraser River on all 4 sides and has no public access onto it. There is an old historic bridge from Hogarth Close, which is to the north of this actual plan. However, it is not accessible. It has a large gate which prevents any access onto this island, which must have significant ecological value insofar as it's not reachable and has not been, I assume, visited by people, but you can never guarantee what kids can do. If I go on to the presentation for the items, so the first case we're discussing is the 5 Otter House case. So that's the application site here. The application proposes 36 studio unit apartments. They all have a 1-to-1 car parking ratio. I am going to propose a slight edit to condition number 3 in your committee packs. It's not overly clear that what is proposed is 1-for-1 car parking, so 1 space per unit for a resident, and in addition to that there's an additional 2 visitor car parking spaces, so there are 38 car parking spaces proposed in total. The same clarity is required for Waterside House insofar as they have 51 parking spaces and an additional 4 for visitors. So I'm proposing those as verbal updates and changes that I'd request are agreed by members tonight. So we go through the location plan for Otter House. We have the existing floor plan, so this is an existing office building which is applying for prior approval for conversion to 36 studio apartments, and these are the proposed conversion layouts. As your report will highlight, the application has been recommended for approval. These are some photographs of the existing building which is currently vacant. The other thing to note is that there is already a prior approval consent on this scheme, on this site, for 31 units. And if I move on to item, sorry about the item numbering, it's all gone a bit awry today, but this is item 12 for Waterside House at Cowley Business Park. This is the second application before us, and this is the change of use under prior approval process to 51 studio apartments. And again, these are the existing ground, first and roof plans. The block plan shows the car parking layout. Again, as I said, the 51 residential units will be provided with 51 car parking spaces, and additional 4 bays will be for visitors. All of the other car parking will be surplus to requirements, but both applications where there are surplus car parking spaces will be restricted and should not be sublet as per the conditions in your reports. Primary reason for doing this is because we in the borough do have a lot of off-airport car parking, and that's the last thing we want to see on some of these sites, so the condition restricts any sort of subletting to those types of organisations. Hopefully they'll turn it into amenity area for the future residents, but that's not something we can control under prior approval. These are the proposed ground, first and second floor plans for Waterside House, and then we have some photographs here of the second building. The applications are both recommended for approval for 36 units at Otter House and 51 units at Waterside House, and I will pass back to the chairman.
Thank you, Mandip, for that. We have a petitioner. Is that Beatrice Prasanda? Are you present? Hello there. When you're ready, you turn on. Yes, you press the button on the there, and the red light comes on.
Got
you
it now.
have 14 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm here on behalf of all the petitioners. We had 2 petitions. One of them, the online petition, reached over 1,100 petitioners, several hundred of those from the Borough of Hillingdon, and most of the remaining ones from the neighbouring boroughs, from Buckinghamshire and Ealing mainly. Obviously, all very concerned about the implications of these developments for their areas. I know that I think all residents, we know that there are only certain aspects that can be observed during this discussion, but the residents still would like to present all the different points that they are concerned about, if that's okay with you all. So first of all, I would like to give you an idea of what this place was 30 years ago. It was a beautiful meadow between 2 waterways, the canal and the river, and it was used for feds. It was mostly undisturbed with wildlife. When the news to develop the site came across, the residents felt really uncomfortable about it. There was very strong opposition, and it's worth mentioning that had not been for the concessions that residents made 3 decades ago, this place would not exist today. And only after the reassurances of the landowners and of the council, the residents agreed to the development. And those conditions were that the site would be restricted to commercial use or industrial use, and that there would be a creation of a 10-meter buffer zone. The reasons to protect the wildlife and further encourage it, as well to protect and bring more employment into the area, and respect the privacy, security and the amenities of residents. The existence of these conditions has been recognized through multiple documentations. If you look at the next slide, you can see there that there are a lot of conditions that have been applied through the planning history of these locations. So there is no denial that the council knows of the existence of those. We also believe that there are minutes of the negotiations, and probably they have been included, these conditions, in the deeds of covenants at which we don't have access. Unfortunately, the main leader of these negotiations from the residents' point of view died last year from COVID. So unfortunately, we don't have access to that documentation. So we have 2 questions regarding to this. One of them was presented in one of the petitions, and it is regarding the potential risk of breach of covenant that could impossibilitate the conversion, the change of use of this site, because the site was designed as a commercial use site, not as a residential one. And we haven't received any answer from the council regarding that covenant. Then we also inquire about how the council can break the pledges that were made 30 years ago. The next slide, you can see some of the conditions. I'm not going to go through them, but they all prove, that those agreements existed. And what I want to talk about today is about what the importance of these areas as a designated area. It's not always forming links in green change, it's also a Borough Grade 1 important site as well. And the most important thing is not the TPOs, it's all these things, is that there's very, very rich wildlife in the site. This corridor has already squashed to the maximum. We have the canal on west side, we have all the buildings, and everything has been squashed to just the woodlands and the river Fraser bank. We have As far as we know, 5 protected species, some of them globally, like the stag beetles. We have water voles, kingfishers, newts, we have swifts, we have bats. Most of them they have been recognized through the ecological survey that was done on the Fraser Island that your colleague was mentioning in the map, that place that was gated and was not given public access. We have is the feeding grounds for herons and egrets, and as well we get sometimes seasonal cormorants, stopping by. Obviously, previous surveys have confirmed the importance of the area, and so has the Wildlife Trust. The implications to the presence here may seem very insignificant, but I think they are very important. This is a tiny strip, but it's vital because it's linking other areas, and not only in our borough, also on the neighbouring boroughs. So any things that happen here may have implications, not right now, but there would be a gradual erosion of this natural corridor that could result in the breakage of and the fragmentation of the natural life corridor. We are surprised that, we cannot take into, we hear talking in the Hillingdon plan, about protect and enhance biodiversity, improve, protect air and water quality, reduce adverse impacts from noise, safeguarding of quiet areas. And then we see that actions like this take place. It seems a bit inconsistent with the same strategy policies that this council is proposing. So our questions to the council is how can they manage, how can they maintain these pledges that they have been made in the Hillingdon plan with the conversion of these 2 sites, and also what measures, more importantly, would be put in place if this goes ahead to protect the wildlife that is here at stake, particularly all the protected species like the bats. This is important from the environmental point of view, but as well as it's very important from the employment point of view. And let me move the slide, sorry. So this is a preferred industrial location, and from November 2021, this very year, this site would have been protected under the new Article 4 direction that is going to take place in November. Now, we have 2 key questions to the Council. Why has this Article 4 direction in 2016 has not included this site, and it has included other sites, particularly taking into consideration that it's going to be recognized from November, the pledges that existed to the residents have been only for commercial use, there's non-strong opposition, as well as knowing that it's adjacent to a nature of conservation area. And as you could see in the map, the reason why it's adjacent is not because it's really adjacent, it's because it was split to avoid having the constraints of being on an area under conservation restrictions, which would have enabled, other options. Also, one of the questions that the residents have is why couldn't an immediate Article 4 direction be implemented to stop this from going ahead? Because from our understanding is that legally that's possible as well. And we need to think about the impact of the pandemic as well. We have to think about how reliant we are on Heathrow jobs. Those jobs, many of them, they are going to be long term. So we need other options. We need office space. We need to attract the companies that may leave London to move to places where the cost may be cheaper. And also we need to acknowledge that there is a shift in practices, in work practices, where people are not going to be so willing to commute. In terms of transport considerations, we are very concerned about about the report that we have seen from the planning officers. We think that the council completely underestimates the impact of traffic. It's not just 1 building, it's 3 buildings. We also have to take into account all sports. In total, it's a potential of 300 inhabitants moving into a highly congested area with major links to all the motorways, Brunel University, Hospital. We have already the hotspot of Cowley Mill Road and so on. I think the report fails to acknowledge that we are the borough with the highest proportion of car work trips as well of ownership. 71% of people own at least 1 or 2 cars. And we have 7% that own 3 or more. So to think that that's not going to have an impact, it will have. There are other major developments along the road. The BM big development that's going to be started as well. So we have to think of the cumulative effect of these new residents coming into a highly congested area. And that's without taking into account, all the other present in other services. We also have to think how the pandemic has accelerated the online deliveries. I live in Ferndale Crescent. Only there I could see, without any exaggeration, up to 20 vans every day delivering goods from Tesco or from Amazon or from wherever, and that even happens during the weekend. So that's completely being underestimated. I'm not going to deal much more into other considerations. Some of them have already been covered by the planning officers. But I want to highlight the potential contamination to the conservation area. More residents mean more pollution. It means more rubbish flying into the woodlands. So that needs to be protected. It goes into the waterway. I've been living there for 4 years. I have never seen anyone from the other side of the river, from the Cowley business parks, coming and picking up the rubbish. It's always the neighbours getting into the river up to their chest, to collect all the rubbish. Also flood risk. I see that the waterside report includes and acknowledges there's a higher risk than the flood risk level 1, and that was based on the flood risk officer. Sorry, I don't remember what the name is exactly. But we have to acknowledge this is a site that is constantly being pumped. There are several water pumps because the site needs drainage. It was very difficult to build at the very beginning because of the level of water that is underground. And these pumps are flooding also the woodland, and nothing is being done, and the council knows about this as well. We also are concerned about light pollution. This council has already told the Cowley Business Park that they will need to turn off the lights after office hours. How are we going to protect residents, alive and wildlife, if these lights are on permanently until midnight? So we want answers to all these questions if any approval is going to go ahead. How are all these considerations going to be tackled? Last but not least, we would like to consider the impact on the amenity of residents. This has been acknowledged multiple times. The loss of privacy. Let's think that many of these trees in winter lose their leaves, and the residents will be looking straight into our gardens, into our own houses. And there is a diminished safety for adjacent neighbours. So the question to the council, to the landowners, is if they would finally erect a wildlife-friendly, and this is important, it needs to be wildlife-friendly. It has to stop humans, but it cannot stop wildlife. Wildlife does not know barriers. If the canal is protected, it's okay. If the river is protected, it's okay. They don't care that the strip in the middle with just a few buildings is not protected. They still cross from one way to another, so it has to be open to wildlife. But we would like, if this was to go ahead, to have a fence erected that stops the public from accessing the protected area. It will stop the contamination. It will stop that the undergrowth is being trampled and damaged. We have very valuable invertebrates like the stag beetles, as we said, and also would be a reassurance for the residents that the privacy and the safety is being respected as well. So we would like to conclude saying that we know that the council has a very difficult job. There are some laws that are in place that do not help. There are also, the job of the council is to provide homes for the people who need to work here, but we also think that the authorities need to think long term. It's not just about a short gain, very, very short term. In the future, people will look at this place and they will not care if the buildings are very beautiful and they have beautiful flats. They will care if there is a beautiful wildlife space there, if there are protected species still living there. That's the heritage we need to leave behind. And also, I think that this council has some moral duty to comply with the promises that were made 30 years ago, because without those, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation right now, and I think that has been forgotten. So we really want to an answer regarding the breach of covenant. So for all those reasons, we ask the Hillingdon Council to take all the necessary measures to still stop this change of use, and to explore if it's still possible to put an Article 4 immediate direction to stop it, and we really hope that our voices are heard, and I'm not just here, so you can put a tick in your box, and that's what the rest of the residents think. With regard to the comments before, as I said, we think that there are things that have been missed, so how does all this match with the Hillingdon plan regarding to the protection of the biodiversity? We want to see those conditions, if this gets approved, regarding the landscape management and maintenance plan of the buffer area. As we have seen there, the ownership is exactly the same of one side or the other. We also want more conditions regarding the flood and drainage. It's irrelevant that I know that there is a flood one risk, but that's not real. I live in Ferndale Crescent. I live at the same distance than water side or water house from the river. And my level of premium insurance is very high because there is a high risk of flood. It cannot be ignored. As I said, we want more information about and more conditions regarding the flooding and draining issues in the site. And I think that those are really all the key points that we wanted to cover. So thank you very much, and I hope that something gets done about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does any councillors wish to ask the petition in question? Councillor
Thank you very much for all that information and the points that you make. I'd just like to ask you about flooding, and you said that the woodland becomes flooded at times. Could you give us a little more detail about that, please?
So the woodland cannot really get, the whole site cannot get flooded because they have pumps working. So there are pumps that are constantly taking out water, so draining the site. There is a lot of water because it's between two waterways. There is a lot of water underneath the ground. So what the old residents told me was it was very, very difficult to build, and at some stage they thought they wouldn't be able to build just because of the amount of water that's coming out and all the drainage. So to avoid any issues, what they have is they have pumps in place right now working, and they are working all the time. And I suppose sometimes they work more, sometimes less, depending on the level of water that they get. And one of them has been damaged, I would say now probably for a year, because when the previous applications came through, we already highlighted that one of them was leaking and flooding an area of the woodlands, and it's still happening. And we sent pictures to the council about that too.
So, are the areas where the buildings are, I understand that, you know, it's flooding the woodland area and that you need pumps continually to control that, but has that ever extended to any of the areas that are built? Because you're between the canal and the river here, aren't you?
And not that I'm aware of. I've only been living in the area for 4 years, but not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
But it's a risk.
Yeah, thank you.
Especially with climate change, we know what's happening. I think we all are very aware.
Anybody else? I have one question for you. Who do you know, who maintains the pumps? Do you know? No. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
For your petition. Should we answer the questions for this petition first before we go to the applicant? Is that okay? Or would you rather the applicant speak and you ask them all together? Because I can't, you have to forgive us, we haven't been here for over a year, so I'm just getting clarity just which way to do it.
The applicant goes first, because sometimes they
answer some of the questions.
Okay.
And
then I can comment on both.
Okay, Harry Johnson, if you'd like to have your 7 minutes, is it 14? 5? No. Oh no, it's 5 minutes for you, sorry.
Would you like us to address the application together or separately?
All together, please.
These all together?
Yeah, then I'll give you 7. No, you have 7 minutes, that's fine. Yeah, that's no problem. Okay.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. My name is Harry Johnson and I'm the agent for these applications. May I first just say how wonderful it is to finally be able to be back attending a planning committee in person and face to face. The development proposal is for the change of use of a vacant purpose-built former office building to residential use under Class O of the Town and Country Planning General Permitted Development Order. The application follows a similar submission made under the same legislation for the change of use of both sites from offices to apartments last year. 31 apartments for Otter House and 29 apartments for a Waterside House. This was approved under delegated powers. Members are aware that the office to residential permitted development right is a long established feature of the English planning system, having first been introduced in 2013 as a way to mitigate the country's chronic housing shortage. In accordance with the regulations, these types of application can only be lawfully determined on 5 key criteria, which I will briefly summarise with reference to the application proposals now. Firstly, in terms of transport and highways, Otter House includes 76 parking spaces with cycle and refuse provision. In a similar manner to the previously approved schemes at the site, this application proposes a total of 36 on-site car parking spaces, including 4 disabled, and 2 visitor spaces to serve 36 new flats. Whilst Waterside has existing 106 car parking spaces with cycle and refuse provision. In a similar manner to the previously approved scheme, the application proposes a total of 51 on-site car parking spaces, including 4 disabled and 4 visitor spaces to serve the 51 new flats. Given the on-site availability of car parking spaces on both sites Our view is that the increase from a previously approved total of 31 to 36 dwellings for Otter House and 29 to 51 dwellings for Waterside House will not result in any adverse impacts on highway safety or severe impact upon the surrounding road network in accordance with the requirements of paragraph 109 of the NPPF. The scheme has been reviewed by the Council's Highways Officer and confirmed as acceptable. Turning to contamination, the proposal will not involve any groundbreaking operations and the wider site is not subject to any known contamination risks, as confirmed by the Council in its assessment of the previous application. In respect to flood risk, the site is located within flood zone 1 for Otter and Waterside House. The proposed change of use will not increase flood risk elsewhere, as confirmed by the Council's assessment of the previous applications. The current scheme has been reviewed by the Council's flood officer and confirmed as acceptable, subject to a condition requiring submission of a landscape management and maintenance plan to prevent access to the off-site landscape zone. Turning to noise, the application site forms part of an urban business park. Accordingly, there are a variety of surrounding buildings with predominantly office uses, so there is not expected to be any impact on noise outside of traditional working hours. The Council's Environmental Health Officer has confirmed the scheme to be acceptable in this regard, in a similar manner to the previously approved applications at the site. Finally, the plans show that each apartment will benefit from clear outlook, with large windows serving all habitable rooms at ground, first and second floor level. All new flats will therefore benefit from good levels of natural light within all habitable rooms. Whilst we are aware that the scheme has attracted significant local interest, our view remains that it is acceptable as it complies with the relevant assessment criteria. This is further demonstrated by the Council's approval of previous applications at the site in 2020. Members of the committee are also asked to note that the purpose-built office buildings that form the basis of these applications have remained vacant for several years and periodically been occupied by squatters and members of the travelling community during this time. The application represents an opportunity for the building to evolve and for the threat of antisocial behaviour to be removed. The proposed development will also provide much needed housing for the local community on previously developed land which is currently vacant and that does not make any positive contribution to the wider area. Therefore, in line with your officer's recommendation, I respectfully urge members to grant permission for the application. Thank you for listening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Janet and Ding, I'm going to ask a question first, though. It's my right as the chairman, I can do that. That's not many privileges, but I'll do that. Would you agree, on behalf of your client, that the condition requiring the pumps to be maintained?
It is my understanding, and this is my understanding, that the wider landscape area, as we've referred to it, is actually under the ownership of the wider business park management, not the sole ownership of the applicant, who owns the freeholds on Waterside and Otter House.
Okay.
Therefore,
fine.
it is not under his direct control.
Okay, fine. Councillor Duncan, you wish to ask a question, and then Councillor Moore. Councillor Duncan first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Duncan first, please. Councillor Duncan first.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Councillor Duncan first. Ladies
Oh.
first. Please. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for the confusion. Thank you for the information. I can see that we've got all these additional parking spaces, but it doesn't meet the maximum standard allowed, which is 1.5 under the London plan. Was there ever any discussion about retaining more parking? Because this is not in a particularly accessible area, and I wondered what the applicant's thoughts were about providing more parking should it be thought to be required.
It is our understanding that one space per dwelling is adequate in this location. Whilst it may be advantageous to retain more spaces, I would suggest that by limiting the number of car parking spaces at the site, retaining as much land as possible around the site for future uses outside of the jurisdiction of a prior approval, but potentially for an amenity space for occupants, would be most effective use of those spaces. I think one space per dwelling here is quite sufficient for the proposed development.
Councillor Morse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I want to ask is a discussion about promises on a covenant. Was this a verbal statement or a written statement, or what have you got to back up this issue of a promise?
Would the member just repeat the question, please? A motorbike went past. What promise was that?
Yeah, what I'm saying is that if there is a covenant, it would be a documentation to support there was a covenant. That's what I'm asking.
He's asking, are you aware of the covenant on the site?
No, we're not.
Fine, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor Hager.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Also, I just wanted to ask a question about the windows. You did say that they were large windows. Do you have an approximate size of them, please?
It's quite clear to see from the photos kindly provided there by the council that these are large office windows. These are not small by any means, and they are serving every habitable room in both sites.
Any further questions? Before I open it to the floor to councillors, the first petitioners, there was a lot you gave us there. I'd like to address some of those things first with officers, if that's okay. So, one, obviously, the conditions that was just mentioned by Councillor Morse. Article 4 was another thing. The overlooking was a thing. The main one that I think will concern most of us here is the wildlife. And obviously the pumps are my concern, because obviously the pumps are maintaining, not flooding. You know, if the pumps weren't there, they'd be flooding. So we need to know who's going to maintain those. I'll over to you, James, and see if you can unpick some of that, please.
Yes, so the one of the points the petitioner was alluding to was in 1998 there was a planning application. There was obviously things said at a committee meeting, conditions imposed, and at that time the planning system, basically if you wanted to develop a site you put in a planning application. Life was relatively straightforward in simple terms, and then in 2013 life became more complicated, and the effect of that was basically that when the prior approval process came in, it overrode a lot of effectively in this particular case it effectively nullified all the planning conditions, and the point I would say in terms of this issue of pledges, I don't think anybody in 1998 would have envisaged the changes to the planning system that occurred in 2013. So unfortunately it's one of those cases of we are where we are in effect. So we're, as a local planning authority, we're only allowed to take into account the 5 criteria. We have no control over the unit mix, and I mention the unit mix because the current mix in both of these developments is entirely studio flats. Now that does have a relevance to parking because we know the uptake in terms of parking stress and the amount of parking required for a development varies between a studio, which is your smallest flat, then the parking demand increases 1, 2, 3 bed. So the reason officers are quite comfortable with one space per flat is because they're all studios. It's unfortunate there aren't family units. We can't control that because of the process that we're stuck with in effect. But the reality is because they're all studios, we don't think there's a need for greater than 1-to-1 parking. And we have had cases with these office to residential developments where they've got more parking than seems to be required, and then what happens is we approve the prior approval, and then at a later date the developer proposes to convert part of the car park to amenity space, and that's generally a positive thing if it happens, but the restrictive nature of these prior approvals means it's not something we can insist on because we're just dealing with the various listed issues. But so unfortunately we don't have any powers that in your officer's opinion to prevent the proposal. All we can do is look at the conditions to control the proposal as best we can, and this is where the addendum is so important, because you've heard from the petitioner, and I would sort of agree with many points that made the petition about the importance of this wildlife corridor that's full of ecology, etc. So we have, within the confines of the 5 constraints, liaise carefully with our various specialist officers, and as it happens, the flood and water management officer does consider that there are grounds to insist on some form of buffer management and maintenance plan. So in plain English, that could be a fence, that could be something that prevents people accessing the TPO 775, and that condition we think is really important, because we genuinely think as officers it will go a long way to address the concerns insofar as they relate to the woodland, the ecology, the security, and quite a number of the points raised. So we don't feel we can stop the development happening, but that condition is the key one. There are other conditions imposed, but that one in your addendum sheet is the really important one, and as Mandip mentioned, we'd be looking to impose it on both schemes. And then the other two, even if it was one of the criteria, even if it full planning applied, we wouldn't be able to prevent the scheme on that count. But in terms of the pumps, notwithstanding what the agent said, I don't see why we couldn't condition that the pumps are maintained. So one of the things you have to ask yourself, is this something we could condition? Well, it seems very straightforward to me. If there are pumps that are controlling water flow, then you can condition that that the pumps are maintained in effect. It doesn't seem to me something that's too complicated to condition that would fail any of the conditions tests. And notwithstanding what I felt was a slightly confusing answer over land ownership, clearly the applicant controls the offices, and I'd be minded if members agreed to impose a condition requiring control of the pumps. I hopefully covered all the points.
You've done very well there, James. A lot of things, and obviously to petition, there's laws in place. We can't stop this type of application going ahead. So it's how we've got to mitigate the circumstances that you've raised to us. This thing, you mentioned there about the wildlife and the possibility of a fence and stuff like that. Have we got more details of that, or is that something that would be able to? Because obviously I'd be concerned about what type of fencing that is.
Yeah, it's slightly tricky because we only have 56 days. So, in fact, I know as a fact that one of these expires within 5 days of today. So, we did discuss with the applicant the condition. They're happy with the condition, and the timescales that we had. That's the best we could achieve. I mean, we will certainly do our utmost to. We're obviously fully aware of our flood and water management officer's concerns. We're aware of the residents' concerns. We'll obviously do our best to achieve a satisfactory outcome. And hopefully, if I may say this, hopefully the developer will work proactively with us, mindful of what they've heard. If there's one further thing I would perhaps suggest, it's only an informative, but those members that have done committee for some time will know we have an informative that relates to the Wildlife and Countryside Act that basically outlines to any applicant the legislative provisions when it comes to protective species. So it would be a good idea just to add that informative. It doesn't stop anybody harming protected species, but it does mean we've put in writing outlining all the legislation that applies if, effectively that's breaking the law, or if you do cause harm to a protected species.
Thank you, James. So those questions now. I'll open it to the floor. Councillor Tuckwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And hands, as I think it was said earlier on, appear to be very much tied on this, and we can only have legal recourse to determine this under the 5 pieces of criteria. But I wanted to explore one of those, which is transport and highways impacts. Now, we've just learned that we're going to have 87 studio apartments in quite a confined area. Not only is it parking, which looks like it's been provided for, but with a lot of people working from home, which I think is going to continue. We see fleets of white vans traipsing up and down residential streets, serving people that are at home, and obviously people that are online shopping and the like. So I'd like to just hear from the highways officer, has that been included in sort of any highways impact which can be looked into?
Okay, Councillor Tuckwell, I'll let the planning head.
I will pass to Alan in a minute so he can give you the highway engineer's view. But one point you obviously do need to bear in mind is that both of these sites already have a prior approval that could be implemented. So the first thing an inspector would say to us is, well, what's the difference between 31 and 36 units? And obviously that's not an easy question to answer. And then there's the further issue that if we go to appeal, what tends to happen is everything starts again in terms of planning conditions. So we then have to argue and justify all the planning conditions over again. So effectively you can put at risk the planning conditions. And I've got and I think it may be the case that we reach a point where members feel it's acceptable subject to some quite important planning conditions. And yeah, if we approve it, we bank those conditions. If we go to appeal, we may lose some of those conditions. So I just wanted to flag that before.
Before you ask the question, would you still like to ask? Do you still want an answer to that question after?
Yeah, I think so,
Okay,
because it came up from the petitioner's statement, so I think
fine.
it needs to be at least teased out.
Mr. Tilley.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The development will have 87 units, and in the AM peak, I would expect 20 cars to be leaving the development in the period 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. It's in the morning peak that the rush hour is most condensed. So we'd expect to see 20 cars going onto the network in the AM peak. We consider that the network could accommodate 20 cars, and set against that, we need to take into consideration that there were previously office uses, which of course would have generated trips of their own. Does that answer your question? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Amanda, you'd like to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think it's unreasonable, given that we have a change in situation from the last prior approval and this current scheme, that there is an increase in deliveries, for us to ask for maybe a delivery bay within the site rather than on the internal access road, because there is surplus car parking within this development, and we are imposing conditions saying you can't lease those additional spaces, so we could maybe use them to the advantage of the future developments. And I think that would just be an amendment to condition number 3 to ask for an on-site, so within the development land parcels, delivery bay per se.
Yeah, I think the point's been made in relation to, we know the peaks in the morning and the peaks in the evening, if those return in the future, but it was more the point that's been picked up around what happens between the peaks with the amount of servicing delivery vehicles. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Hager?
Thank you. Yes, one of the issues that's picked up here is air quality as well. So I just wanted to ask around the air quality, if there's anything we could do. Thank you.
Who wants to be up? Amanda? Yeah.
I'm happy to take that. Now, air quality isn't one of those 5 material planning considerations that we can take account of. The other argument could possibly be that there will actually be less trip generation because less of the parking spaces is being used. So you can't consider it, but even if you could consider it, I'm not sure that it would be adding further harm in terms of air quality.
Councillor Duncan, I do apologise. I had you written here and I forgot.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, Chairman, because I think members will recall that not long ago we refused an application on the B&M site, and that was partly due to flooding. And we said that where there are flood risks, yes, you can have offices, and yeah, if they become flooded, yes, of course, that's damaging to business and the office staff. But there are more sensitive uses, which are residential, and also, in this case, there was a proposed health centre, which is very much needed. So if we had been able to approve that, we would have done at that time, not just because of the additional housing, but because of the much needed health centre, which the council has been trying to provide one way and another for that area for some time. So I'm just wondering, where it says flooding risks on site here, what do we have to have? Because this is proposing housing. Fortunately, at national government level, they do seem to recognise, yes, that is a sensitive use. And would that, if we're having to pump out woodland next door to it, what weight does that have in this case? I would have thought quite a lot, because as you point out, if the pump stopped working for some reason, then, you know, there could potentially be a really quite disastrous situation for people living in this building. So I wonder if there could be some comment and explanation about why we're refusing it in one place. I know it's under different, you know, arms. This is a prior approval, the other was a straightforward planning application. But one of the things we're specifically charged with looking at in these prior approvals is the flooding risks on site. And do we think that that is acceptable? I mean, to my, you know, lay eye, I don't think I would want to move into somewhere where, you know, the water levels on either side of me are having to be got rid of by a pump, which might break down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan. Obviously, the health centre, we've been through this long. It's been offered in many locations in that area, and it hasn't been taken up by the NHS. So we won't. I don't think we should be mentioning that. But I take your point. Mandy, do you want to pick up on this?
The main difference between the B&M store and this application site is that that development site was within flood zones 2 and 3, so the highest levels of flooding risk. This application site, so both of them, Otter House and Waterside House, within the red area on the plan on the screen, are in flood zone 1, so the lowest level of risk. It's the area along, I didn't bring a flooding map, which is not helpful, sorry. So it's this strip of Fraser River and a small area of land on the western boundary, which is within the functional floodplain, which is the area of concern. It's not actually the application site. So the reason we're able to impose some flooding conditions in the landscape buffer is because we know that this area of land is under the same control as the application site. So it's not we're not able to apply the same policies as we did at B&M store. Thank you.
And that's why we're trying to add this other condition about the pump. So that will solve. I think that will control that. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chair. My question is basically a lot of these problems are all solved by this condition, sustainable water management. Now, adjacent to this site, we have 2 level 3 sites. We never see in this specification for the storage on the site. So we get a standard condition, and I have got no idea how long I've got water storage on that site. And I mean, water engineers are very, very good, and I appreciate that. But when I'm voting, I've got no idea, because for each site it must be different. But we just got this word statement. It's all solved by this condition. And do we publish what this condition contains? Because it's quite important when we make a decision.
Mandy.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Morse, are we talking about the sustainable water management condition in the officer reports, in the committee reports, or the new one that we have proposed?
Which one is it? Both of them?
I agree it's a difficult question. I'll just have to accept the answer.
Okay, fine. Well, we'll take both of them. Okay. Right. Any more? I think we have exhausted this. So we've got an additional condition about maintaining the pumps. Is that correct? We have an informative about the wildlife. Is that correct? We also have an addendum to condition 3, and can I get this right from officers that the wildlife buffer zone with the fencing and all that will be, who will decide on the fence, and would that be the Wildlife Association, or how does that work?
So the applicant would submit details to local planning authority, so officers to discharge the condition. We would certainly refer it to our flood and water management officer. I note the point, I think there was a point being made that if there's a kind of solid barrier, that might be an issue for species moving about. Yeah. So hence, you can have railings. There's different ways to create a barrier without having it totally solid. But
that will be maintained by the applicant.
So the conditions require. Yeah, if I can perhaps approach this a different way. So with each of the planning conditions, the onus is on the applicant to submit details that satisfy officers that the condition should be discharged. So if the applicant didn't put in suitable details, it would be open to us to not discharge the condition and refuse it. So what I would say is that obviously if the applicant has a dialogue with us, then hopefully they will put forward something that is suitable. And then Mandy did mention in terms of having a condition that requires a servicing bay in both car parks because of the excess parking, should members wish to agree that as well.
So that's what we've got.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like every member of this committee, we never like being sat here and restricted into to what we can and can't do, and we like to scrutinise things and alike. But on this occasion, we are where we are. I think the debate around the additional conditions has been a healthy one, and on that basis, I'd like to move officer's recommendation with those additional conditions.
I have a seconder, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, as Councillor Tuckwell says, we've got to play with the cards we've been dealt and the somewhat restricted cards. So I'm more than happy to second it with the conditions mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I have the rest of the votes of the committee, please? Those in favour with those additional conditions? Fine, thank you. Any abstentions? Councillor Duncan, thank you. Is that clear, Anisha? Have we all got that? Thank you very much. That's that. Thank you very much for your time, both of you, and wish you a safe journey home. So we go on to...
Chairman.
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon.
Chairman.
Before we go, can I take those votes for both of the applications, please? Is that agreed? Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you.
Chairman, before we move on, has anybody been tinkering with the volume? Because I find that it's very difficult to hear what is being said. And
Yes.
I'm sorry to say I really couldn't hear everything that the petitioner said. And that is negating what we are here for.
That's fine. Obviously, it's new, so we'll get them to turn it up.
Can we turn it up ourselves, or do we have to wait till the next time?
No, it's going to be done as we speak.
What about I suggest at least 50% to 75%
Okay,
more?
fine, thank you. Thank you very much. we are going to do item 8. I was just testing whether you could hear me. We're going to go to item 8, which is the former Nestle's factory site, Avenue Hayes, which is a variation of condition 61. Mandip, would you like to
Thank you,
take this away?
Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Agenda item number 8 is the Nestlé factory site. Now, the Nestlé factory site is located in Hayes. Nestles Avenue runs along the southern boundary. We have the canal along this strip, and then the Crossrail line running east to west. The application has been to Planning Committee a few times. We granted planning permission for a mixed development with residential accommodation, some of which is actually now occupied on the eastern portion of the site, and the western portion of the site comprised 4 commercial industrial units. Now, this application relates to the commercial side of the development, so they're making minor material changes to facilitate the needs of an occupier who is proposing to take on one of the units, which is unit number 4. Now, you may recall that the locally listed facade of the former factory building has been retained, so the changes that we're seeing actually relate to part of the locally listed facade that's being retained. The changes primarily comprise of adding additional insertions into the elevation to allow more docking bays. It is a locally listed building, but the Conservation Officer has not raised objection to the addition of the docking bays, and from an economic development perspective, it's positive news that there is a company that wants to take on the building, albeit there are alterations required to the facility. The application is recommended for approval. You'll see within the report that we're also proposing to have a deed of variation to make sure we secure all of the previous obligations onto this new planning permission. Otherwise, we consider it to be uncontroversial, and we are supporting it and recommending approval. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the presentation. I think this is a good amendment, actually, and as you say, it sort of attracts some economic development as well. Got no problems with it. Happy to move officer's recommendation.
Thank you very much. Can I have a second to Councillor Chapman?
Happy to second, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. For approval, please. Unanimous. Okay, thank you. Can you hear us now, too?
It's certainly better, but I'd put it a little bit more.
Okay, we'll make note of that. Okay, that's approved. Is that okay, Anisha? We'll follow up. Okay, lovely. Item 9, which is TCM House, Newport Road, Hayes, Charville, Section 73, vary condition 2. Mandip, would you like to give us a report?
Thank you, Chairman. The agenda item TCM House has been to Planning Committee previously. We have granted planning permission for the erection of a building which comprises of 4 stories and is a residential hostel, so it was temporary move-on accommodation. So it was 28 units, and during the process of the build construction, it's been realised that they can't meet their energy targets, so they need to add PV panels to the roof. This is a positive change. We're able to make sure that the development is achieving its carbon reduction requirements. The PV panels will be marginally visible. They are always tilted, so the front elevation does show just their visibility, but it is a flat roof, so hopefully it will be only marginally visible. And this is the layout of the PV arrays on the proposed roof. Again, this is a positive addition. It does result in less green roof. However, there are other measures to secure the same greenfield runoff rates which are set out in the report. The Energy Officer and the Flooding Officer, Drainage Officer, are both happy with the proposals, and the application is recommended for approval. I think I have a photograph of the building partially built for you to have a look at. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Councillor Duncan?
Yes, this is a positive proposal. I move officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a second, Councillor Yarrow?
Yeah, I really wanted to ask a question as well.
Fine, go ahead.
How many car parking spaces are involved with this application?
I believe the last application only had 10 parking spaces. It was not a one-to-one proposal because this is a hostel. Because they weren't residential accommodation, we didn't apply the 1-for-1 ratio. And because it's hostel move-on accommodation, we envisaged that most of the users wouldn't have vehicles. So there is limited parking on site, but there is no change as a result of this planning application and change to the number of parking spaces we've approved. Thank you.
Would you like to second that?
I'll second it, yes.
Thank you very much. Can I have all members vote for the officer's recommendation? That's unanimous as well. Thank you very much. We go on to the last one of this evening, which is item 10, number 1 and 1A, Bath Road, Heathrow.
Thank you, Chairman. The application at 1 and 1A Bath Road seeks the demolition of the existing buildings and the erection of a 6-storey, 237-bedroom hotel. The application site's on our screen. Now, some of you may recall the site. It has been to Planning Committee in the past, and that was for a 5-storey hotel development. The principle of development is considered to be acceptable. It's a hotel location. It's in the location of where we have already granted permission for a hotel. It's not in one of the preferred hotel locations, so there has been full scrutiny of whether it meets the sequential test, and it does. So this is a suitable site for a hotel. Previously, there was discussion during the last planning application about the maintenance of this land which adjoins the application site. So I wanted to reassure you that all of the conditions that were previously imposed to try and secure adequate tidying up of the land are reimposed on this planning application, following the discussions that happened at the last planning committee meeting. So the proposed site plan is very similar, almost identical to the last planning application that's been approved. So the footprint of the building for the hotel sits here. The car parking to facilitate it is at the rear, and this land remains unchanged. We have basement levels for car parking within the building. We have the ground floor plan, which has some communal areas to service the hotel use, and then above, on all levels, are bedrooms at the development site. We have proposed north and east elevations, proposed south and west elevations. Now, it's not easy to see, but there is a red dotted outline which shows the previously consented height of the building, but I did try my best to do a crop of what we have approved on just one of the other elevations, the southern, and a comparison with the proposed. Now, it has been considered to be acceptable in design terms. It's set back from the road frontage, and the height is considered to accord with policy requirements. We have some photographs of the application site. So this is the existing building, which I believe one of them is an existing banqueting or function room, and so this is providing some of the same uses but not identical. The application is recommended for approval, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do open to the floor. Councillor Tuckwell.
Yeah, thank you. I remember this one. I think it's been in front of us a couple of times actually, and there was quite a healthy debate last time. Question I've got really, I think, might be for highways is, I see we've got a coach park. Well, there's this parking space for a coach. Do we have any information on how the parking configuration for the coach will be organised for dropping off pedestrians? Is there anything that can... You have got, okay?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There will be coach drop-off at the front of the hotel, and coach parking, as I recall, again at the rear of the hotel. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
Any other questions? Do I have a proposer, please? Councillor Tuckwell.
Yeah, I'm happy to move officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Hagg.
I'll second. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can we have a vote, please? Those in agree with that? Full house again, Anisha. Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank you all. And we've got number 11. Sorry, beg your pardon. Getting ahead of myself. I thought that was the last one. See, I'm more organised at home when I got the screen. So, don't know. This is like the sunlight's coming through. I don't know where I am. I'm disorientated. It's a deed of variation. Do we really need it on a 106? We don't need a presentation on this, do we? Does anybody want one? I'm quite happy for that. No? Okay, so Well, yes, Councillor Tuckwell.
Happily move officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Chapman. Thank you. And can I have your votes, all please? All in favour? Thank you very much. Again, another full house. That is it, I think. There we go. Thank you all very much. And have a good evening. Those of you, I'll see you again in a minute for North.